Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're going to dive into something really interesting, especially for you, UK property income.
We've all heard the basics about, rental income, but your research, this HMRC internal guidance, really changes things.
Yeah.
Turns out there's a whole hidden side to this. Exceptions, quirks, the kind of stuff most people would never even know to look for.
Right.
You found a real gold mine with this HMRC manual.
Yeah, it's true. A lot of people think property income, it's just that typical buy-to-let.
Yeah.
But when you actually look at this manual, it shows you just how many different ways, all the different streams of income you can get from property that aren't really what you'd think of as a standard rental business.
So we should unpack that a little bit, right? I mean, looking at your notes, you've got fishing rights, hotels, even something called tied premises. Not exactly your average rental property, is it?
No, and I think each of those have their own place in the UK tax code. A lot of it is rooted in, well, I think you could say historical context. Maybe specific business practices, how things have been done for a long time.
Right.
For example, we can look at fishing rights. So in the HMRC manual, they differentiate between renting out fishing rights, which would just be property income, and running like a massive commercial fishing operation, which is trading income.
So like renting out a single fishing rod versus, running a fleet of fishing trawlers.
Yeah.
Totally different.
Exactly. HMRC is basically trying to figure out where the line is between just renting something out, an asset, and actually really engaging in a trade. And how big that fishing activity is, what kind of scale it is, that's a big part of how they decide.
So even these really small distinctions can make a huge difference when it comes to tax.
Yeah.
And it seems like this trade versus rental idea, it keeps coming up in the HMRC manual. You flagged it with hotels and guest houses too, right?
Right, yeah. Running a hotel, that's seen as a trade. It's not a simple rental. You're not just giving someone a space. You're providing a service, an experience, and how that income is taxed, well, that's a big deal.
Makes sense when you think about those extras hotels have, like, I don't know, cleaning, room service, those tiny shampoo bottles everyone loves?
Yeah.
But what about this tied premises thing? I have to admit, sounds a bit like something out of like a mystery novel or something.
Yeah, a little bit. It's basically like, imagine a pub. It has to buy all its beer from its specific brewery because of its lease.
Oh.
That's what they'd call a tied premise.
Yeah. So it's not just rent for the building then, it's tied into this whole other business deal.
Exactly, you've got it. It's more than just, I'm a landlord, you're a tenant. It's all part of a bigger trading relationship, which obviously changes how the taxman looks at that rental income.
This HMRC manual, it's like peeking behind the curtain.
Yeah.
UK property income, it's not simple at all.
No.
We've barely started, and I can already see how you could get tripped up if you didn't know about these little details.
Yeah, and that's the key thing, isn't it? You need to know what you're looking for. You need to know what you don't know. You know what I mean?
I know what you mean.
The more you understand all this, the better you're going to be at dealing with UK property income tax.
For sure. And speaking of things that aren't always what they seem, your research on caravan sites really highlights that line between rental and trade, doesn't it? It's really interesting how the HMRC uses these specific examples, Like you said, caravan sites, it's a great way to show it. Seems like you could start out just renting out some land for a caravan, but then suddenly it's a whole different thing tax-wise.
It really shows you how easy it is to go from a simple rental to a full-blown trade without even realizing it. If you're just running out a basic pitch, no frills, yeah, that might be fine under the normal rental rules. But the second you add anything extra like meals, some kind of entertainment, even just cleaning services, the HMRC might see it as a trade.
So it's all about those little extras, right? The material activities, I think the HMRC called them, they're what can change things. And, it makes me think about what you were saying about that render room scheme.
Oh, definitely. Good point. The HMRC manual specifically mentions, what happens if you give meals to a lodger and how that can make things murky, whether it's rental income or trading income.
So anyone listening who's thinking about renting out a spare room, they've really got to pay attention to this. Just a bed, basic stuff, that's one thing. Start offering regular meals, though. That changes how HMRC sees it. Like, where's the line between being a landlord and running a B&B, right?
Yeah, that's it. Exactly. It just shows how important it is to know these little details, especially if you're new to all this.
Definitely. It's like the HMRC loves to keep us on our toes,
Yeah.
You even found something called surplus trade accommodation in the manual.
Yeah.
Sounds so complicated.
Honestly, it's not as bad as it sounds. Imagine you do some freelance work from home and you rent out your office sometimes when you're not using it. Or maybe you've got a small business and you've downsized, so you've got this empty warehouse space.
Okay, yeah, I'm following so far. Sounds like a normal rental situation, on the surface at least. So, what's the catch?
Well, here's the interesting bit. Technically, any rent you get for that extra space, it's property income. But the HMRC, they might actually let you count it as part of your trading income under certain circumstances.
So, even though it looks like a regular rental from the outside, they get that it's really connected to your main business.
Exactly. It's like they're looking at the bigger picture, you know, seeing how all your income streams fit together. It's knowing this kind of stuff that can really help you figure out the UK property income tax system.
I'm starting to realize how much, I don't know, we haven't even touched on those Wayleaves and easements you mentioned. Those sound like something straight out of a fantasy novel.
They sound pretty ancient, I'll give you that. But honestly, there's still a big deal in UK property, especially if you own land.
Okay, you have to explain. What are Wayleaves and easements in plain English? I have to say, when you mentioned Wayleaves and easements earlier, I thought we were going back in time or something.
Yeah, they sound a bit like they belong in a history book, don't they?
A little bit.
But to put it simply, it's basically like you're giving someone permission to use your land
Right.
for something specific, even though you still own it. So say a utility company, they need to run power lines across your property.
Right.
They'd probably arrange a wayleave with you.
Ah, so that's how those big pylons end up on people's land with all those cables running across. So when they pay you for that, is that like considered property income?
It can be, yeah. But it's not always that simple. The HMRC manual, it actually says payments for things like cables, pylons that could be classed as property income, trading income, or even get this capital receipts. All depends on the details.
Hold on, 3 different options for basically the same thing. How's anyone supposed to know which one's right for them?
It's all in the details. Are you getting paid regularly, like rent? Or is it a one-off lump sum? What exactly are they allowed to do, and for how long? The HMRC manual, it actually goes into all these tiny little details.
That's why this deep dive is so useful. I mean, even if you just let someone run a cable across your property, there could be all this stuff you haven't thought about.
Exactly. And you know what? The HMRC manual even mentions, believe it or not, mines and quarries.
Right, those old school things. You were saying earlier how some of this is about history. Why do those have their own set of rules? Feels like we're talking about a different time.
You're not wrong. A long time ago, income from things like mines, it was treated differently for tax, more like a trade than just property income. And it seems like the HMRC manual, it's still kind of working with that, even today, but trying to make it fit with how things are now.
So even the UK tax code has these layers of history hidden inside it. Fascinating. And you even found a section on electric line wayleaves. They get really specific, don't they?
It just goes to show, even if it's something super niche, there are rules for it in the UK tax system. You just have to know what they are and how they apply to your situation.
Okay, let's take a breather for a second. We've covered a lot: fishing rights, caravan sites, these wayleaves. If our listener is really digging into UK property income, what are the key things they should take away from all this?
The big one. UK property income, it's not as simple as it seems, that's for sure. What you might think is a regular rental, there could be a lot more to it, and you've got to understand all the things that could affect how HMRC taxes it.
No doubt about it. This deep dive has really opened my eyes, and it just shows doing your research is so important. You definitely did yours. Digging up this HMRC manual, it's got so much detail, we just scratched the surface. But I hope this gives our listener a good starting point to work from.
And, while you're exploring all this, think back to that example we talked about earlier, renting out a room, providing breakfast. Do you think that would be classed as a trade based on what we've seen in the HMRC manual, or would that be covered by the rent-a-room scheme? Something to think about.
Great question to leave our listener with. And remember, this is just one deep dive, and there's a whole ocean out there. Keep those questions coming, keep learning, and we'll catch you on the next episode of The Deep Dive.